The word creativity and creative acts might seem somewhat abstract to us. That is, we know when we see something that we consider creative, and we know when we see something that is not creative. If I were to take a fish tank and put wings on it, that's a novel combination of things, which is one of the key criteria for an act or an object or a piece of music that is creative. And yet, neither of us, I believe, would find it very creative or very interesting that a fish tank has wings on it. The word creativity and creative acts might seem somewhat abstract to us. That is, we know when we see something that we consider creative, and we know when we see something that is not creative. Things that aren't creative are things that we see every day. A car with 4 tires, for instance, a bicycle with 2 tires, not creative. However, we also see things that are novel, that are different, and that we don't really think of as creative. In fact, they can be downright trivial. If I were to take a fish tank and put wings on it, that's a novel combination of things, which is one of the key criteria for an act or an object or a piece of music that is creative. And yet, neither of us, I believe, would find it very creative or very interesting that a fish tank has wings on it. For something to be creative, it actually has to reveal to us something fundamental about the world or about how we work. The most creative and the most interesting and the most beloved creative acts reveal to us something fundamental about the world or the way that we work in a way that delights and thrills and surprises us, but that we aren't even aware what that fundamental rule is. Creativity is a way of interacting with the world or combining or recombining things in the world in a way that appears novel to us and to other people. Creative acts, on the other hand, of course, involve novel combinations of existing rule sets. That could be different combinations of music or colors or shapes or technology, etc. But it does so in a way that tells us something fundamental and different. Anytime we talk about mechanisms and brain areas, what's far more important than the names of those brain areas is an understanding of what they do. I want to discuss creativity in terms of what actually goes into being creative, and it turns out there are just 2 elements, and those 2 elements are now well understood from the perspective of psychology, and fortunately, the neuroscience well supports what the psychology says and vice versa. And those 2 elements that go into coming up with a creative idea and then implementing or developing that creative idea into something real that you and the rest of the world can experience are divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is taking some known object or event in the world or sport or concept. It could be running, it could be a musical note, it could be jumping, it could be a particular color on a piece of paper, and asking yourself, how many different things could that thing actually be? Divergent thinking involves taking one simple, what we would call in neuroscience or psychology, stimulus, one image or sound, etc., and trying to radiate out from that as many different divergent situations, properties, characteristics, events, things from that one specific element. The basis of divergent thinking is that more than one idea is correct. In fact, the more ideas that you have about one thing, the better your divergent thinking. Dopamine acting in one network directly underlies divergent thinking, whereas dopamine in another brain network underlies convergent thinking. Dopamine is responsible for both divergent thinking and convergent thinking, but through separate pathways. Well then, if you can understand how those 2 separate pathways work and how to engage them differentially, therein lie the tools that you can use both to explore ideas, in other words, find what it is that could be creative, and then systematically test each of those ideas for what is truly creative. Whenever people talk about dopamine hits, typically they're talking about activities such as social media, which dopamine may be involved at some level, but often it's the case that the behavior associated with that thing, in this case social media, is more of the compulsive nature rather than an active seeking of something with positive anticipation. There have been some beautiful, what are called loss of function studies, where particular brain areas are either depleted of dopamine or where dopamine in some cases, I guess what we call called gain-of-function studies, although not the kind of gain-of-function studies associated with virology, different gain-of-function studies where you enhance the level of dopamine in the brain. What you find is that both divergent and convergent thinking are enhanced when levels of dopamine are elevated. Your mood relates to your level of dopamine at baseline, what we call your sort of tonic, as it's called, meaning consistent or ongoing level of dopamine. How that dictates whether or not you are going to be better at one particular aspect of the creative process or another, and how you can enhance your creativity in the very short term, very quickly, using tools that are known to trigger additional release of dopamine, which in some cases is good, and in some cases is bad, I should mention. And in other words, determine how you feel in one moment should dictate what sort of tool you should use in order to become more creative.